Spider-Man gets new powers and he gets a new suit. This story's amazing. So this is the official start of the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And one of the cool things that's going to happen is we're going to invoke the Octessence, which for those of you guys who don't know what that is, we are going to talk about it. It'll probably appear in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially given the return of the Scarlet Witch eventually. But what this does is this initially picks up with Spider-Man kind of doing his thing, but basically he's met with the arrival of Doctor Doom. So do you guys recall in the Avengers story that we did, at least those of you guys who saw it, where Doctor Doom appeared to the Avengers and then kind of questioned everything they stood for, right? With Doctor Doom being the new Sorcerer Supreme, a mantle that he gained at the end of Blood Hunt, when he effectively took Doctor Strange's powers. Well, the idea is that he's basically doing this across the universe, right? To like all these different superheroes showing up and then calling them into question, the whole 9 yards. And what he does here is when he appears to Spider-Man, he basically just kind of says like, I have a task for you, a task that only you can basically uphold and no one else. And Spider-Man's initially like dismissive, right? He's just kind of like, okay, whatever, man. Like, I've got more important things to worry about. And it's kind of done in a hilarious way, right? Like, Doctor Doom's just like a task for which you are uniquely suited, right? A task at which you must prevail. And Spider-Man's just kind of like staring at him for a second. And he's like, your stunned silence belies understanding of the gravity of the situation. And Spider-Man's like, no, I was just trying to come up with like an elegant way to basically tell you to shove it. So I love that Spider-Man like has this whole kind of not taking it seriously, but in effect, like he's kind of thrust into this situation because what ends up happening is you're met with the arrival of a guy named Centros. Now, Centros is new to Marvel Comics. He's never appeared before, but he's strikingly similar to Sidorak. There is a reason for that. When Centros shows up, Spider-Man initially, kind of goes to fight him for a minute, and then Centros just sort of like, shoos him away in one of the funniest ways ever, right? He calls him like a fleck of spittle, which is kind of amazing. I've never heard that phrase before, and I kind of want to just like hurl that insult at somebody. I don't know why I would, and I can't think of an occasion where I would need to, but I kind of hope maybe one day I can. But what this guy talks about is the fact that like the covenant is upon them. And that's what Doctor Doom was talking about, right? Like this is a covenant that you are now a part of, Spider-Man. It is unavoidable. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of this fight, Spider-Man's met by the arrival of Doctor Doom. And initially, Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, like what's going on? Because this guy is quite literally using gravity to his advantage. He's manipulating gravity. It's like, how in the world do I defeat this guy? And that's where Doom says, any who perish fall victim to your negligence. Accept my task, receive my aid, or their deaths will be on your head. And Spider-Man ultimately says yes. And that's when Doctor Doom says, pay attention. And he tells him this kind of story. He says, from the Darkhold Chronicles, Age of Strange, the young Sorcerer Supreme explored the lengths and depths of his magnificence, and while their potential inspired awe, he quickly discovered the limits of his human power. In order to guard the Earth and its environs from the countless threats of the immaterial cosmos, he would require aid. Bargains would be struck. Doom would never have required such unreliable and insufficient systems, but we play the hands we are dealt. While studying the eldritch histories of the Darkhold, Strange discovered the unassailable Crimson Casket of Sidorak, ample protection for the Earth. For this dimension, however, the Crimson God Sidorak is generally immovable in body and mind, as is well known. Strange, nothing if not clever, entered into a parley with the god in order to sway him toward a pact. Eventually, a covenant was forged, but Strange quickly learned that cleverness and intelligence are not the same. Now, here's where things get really, really interesting. For those of you guys who are familiar with Sidorak, bear with me here for a second, because I imagine a lot of people watching this probably are not. Sidorak will likely become a major player in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we know that from like the events of Infinity War, right? Like those red bands that Doctor Strange used on Thanos, those were the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. At least it looked like those. Now, because Doctor Strange didn't actually say the spell out loud, you could really make an argument that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Sidorak, Chthon, Mephisto, they're all one and the same, right? They're effectively the same being, just kind of operating in different ways. But in Marvel Comics, Sidorak is part of a group called the Octessence. Now, the way this works, most of you guys have heard us talk about the idea of the Elder Gods, right? These incredibly powerful beings that existed on Earth at one point in time. Sidorak and Ragador and those guys were all part of that group. What ended up happening is that a kind of contest was basically brought together by these guys. The idea being that each of them would leave an artifact on Earth. And because it's the octessence meaning 8, what this meant was that there would be 8 individuals that would pick up these artifacts. And when they did, they would each lead 1/8 of humanity in a war against the rest of humanity. And the idea was to basically answer the question, who's the most powerful of these entities, these elder gods, more or less, that exist out there? And whoever's avatar on Earth won with their 1/8 of humanity, that would show who the most powerful person was. And so on Earth, as most of you guys are probably able to guess by now, the avatar of Sidorak on Earth is Juggernaut, hence the nature of the inscription, whosoever touches this gem shall possess the power of the crimson bands of Sidorak. Henceforth, you who read these words shall become forevermore a human Juggernaut, or something like that. But basically, like when Cain Marco picked up the gem, it turned him into the avatar of Sidorak on Earth. Colossus also had the same role at one point. What this does is it brings in a whole other side of this history that we never knew before. And so what we're told here is that in exchange for erecting the casket and protecting Earthrealm, Strange had to commit to besting the 8 scions of Sidorak, the restless, spoiled, terrible godlings eager to prove themselves worthy of their father's throne. Strange thought it a fair bargain because he believed he found a loophole in their cosmic contract. There is one rivalry that precedes the Allbirth, Sidorak and Ragador. Strange armed himself with the sacred reeds of Ragador, which all but assured that should he fall at the hands of the Crimson Scions, he would be reborn and thusly never lose. The Covenant demands that at the top of the Crimson calendar, Earth put forward a champion to battle the Scions for Sidorak's amusement. And so it's cool, right? Because what it establishes here is that Doctor Strange essentially kind of prevailed, right? Like every time the Covenant was invoked, Strange answered and paid the mighty toll to maintain the casket every single time. There's little I admire about Stephen Strange, but his tenacity cannot go unrecognized. And so in effect, he does this every single year. And so what ends up happening is Doctor Doom tells Spider-Man, because I've got more important things to do, you're gonna fight in my stead as my bannerman. It's the most Doctor Doom thing ever, right? Now, have no illusions here, and this is a fight that we've never seen. It's a fight I would love to see. Doctor Doom going against Sidorak. That would be kind of cool, because one of the things to keep in mind is that when it comes to these incredibly powerful beings that exist out there in these other realms and so on, they're effectively gods within their own realm. So if you travel to the flickering realms of Chthon, he's unstoppable, this immutable force. The same thing with Sidorak, Ragador, so on and so forth. It goes on and on and on and on. And so what ends up happening is that when Doctor Doom gives these new powers to Spider-Man, he says, Earth's Sorcerer Supreme, I declare Spider-Man is Earth's new champion in the Covenant of Sidorak. You will face the scions of Sidorak as my bannerman, armed with the tools to aid you, arcane armor to give you access to the mystic arts and protect your physical form, and 8 of the life-restoring reeds of Ragador. Face the scions, beat the scions, protect the Earth. This is the word of doom. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? Doctor Strange is incredibly powerful and incredibly capable, but truth to tell, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. It's not to say that he's dumb, right? I mean, it's not one of these things where like the engine's running and there's nobody behind the wheel. He's not an idiot, but he's nowhere near as intelligent as Spider-Man is. And so with someone like Peter Parker, it's all the powers that would normally be available to Doctor Strange combined with Peter Parker's intellect. You can only imagine how quickly this fight ends. And it's cool because what ends up happening is Citros just kind of declares that it is in his nature to manipulate and to control gravity itself. He's the thing that binds everything together. Now, he's really speaking more in metaphors than anything else, but he's kind of arguing that he's like a fundamental force of gravity, but inside of him is what's called a black heart hole. In reality, you can just call this a black hole, right? A singularity, a gravity well, whatever you want to call it, right? Just infinite gravity forever. And so what goes on is that Spider-Man actually ends up realizing that because of the nature of the powers that he has, he intrinsically knows how to just counter these spells. Now, that is a little bit different from what we're familiar with when it comes to magic wielders in comics, when it comes to Doctor Strange, when it comes to Jericho Drum Brother Voodoo, and the kids that are part of the Strange Academy, and like Wanda and so on and so forth. They have to learn these magics, right? They have to learn these spells and incantations. They cannot just suddenly know how to do it. So we can likely assume that it's just knowledge that was given to Spider-Man by way of Doctor Doom in order for him to achieve his goal. I mean, after all, it wouldn't make any sense to give him all these powers, drop him in the middle of a fight that he has to win or the Earth is going to be destroyed, and then give him no ability to know how to use these powers, right? Like, tell him you want to delay the fight, you got to study for the next 10 years, right? It's not going to work that way. So it just kind of makes good sense that it all comes together. But what Spider-Man says here is that by way of his knowledge, he's aware of the fact that the luminescence of limitless Langolin can not only fill a black heart hole, it can overload and destroy it. So literally, he punches this guy's heart, and what follows is essentially spaghettification. Now, that is an actual scientific term. I don't know how many of you guys have actually heard of that, but spaghettification is really, really fascinating. I mean, it's brutal and gruesome, but it's fascinating. In effect, the gravitational pull at your feet is drastically more intense than it is at your head. So within the span of less than a second, right, literally your feet are pulled in first, you're stretched to the very limit until, as Neil deGrasse Tyson describes it, you become a stream of atoms descending into the abyss. That's literally what happens to Spider-Man. He's spaghettified and sucked down into this black hole. Now, of course, Centros is destroyed as well, but with this first test down, Spider-Man wakes up in the afterlife and meets Phil Coulson. Now, Phil Coulson's existence in the realm of death actually has nothing to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and his death during the events of Avengers and supposedly resurrection during Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The cool thing about this is that he's actually the new cosmic entity of death in Marvel Comics. That actually goes in the events of Infinity Watch, and even before that, it went into, I can't remember what the name of the story is, but it's the one where he's tricked by Mephisto into basically altering reality so that there is no Avengers, and like Hyperion and the Squadron Supreme run everything. Of course, it all gets set back and you learn about the Council of Mephistos, right? Literally a multiverse of Mephistos working together to conquer the multiverse. It was amazing. It was this phenomenal story. I don't think we ever, either we didn't cover it or we never finished it. But what ended up happening more recently in the Infinity Watch comics is that while Mistress Death was confined to the actual Death Stone, Mistress Death, as part of this stone, actually resurrected Phil Coulson from the dead, and he temporarily took her place as the new cosmic entity Death. And so when Spider-Man shows up here, like, of course, Phil Coulson knows who Spider-Man is, right? Like, and under this new role, he knows who's supposed to die and when and all that kind of stuff, but he's also aware of like all the little in-betweens and all the small little adjustments and tricks that you can pull off to basically save yourself from the realm of death. And so that's where he's just kind of like, okay, like, for what it's worth, I jumped right to cause of death in your file. Whatever your name was, you'll always be Spider-Man to me, right? Indicating, of course, different versions of Peter, different people play Spider-Man across the multiverse and so on and so forth. But then Coulson realizes that Peter has the reads. And so he's like, I am so sorry, man. Stay strong, dude, because you're going to be back here. And so Spider-Man literally resurrects from the dead. And he talks about how like the entire nature of these reads really kind of feel like a reversal of the natural order. That when a person dies, they're supposed to stay dead. They're not supposed to cheat death and come back from the dead or anything like that. And that's why he says, like, I don't want this, right? Nothing in magic comes without cost. The cost of defying the very foundation of a mortal existence. It's inconceivable pain. Pain worse than anything Spider-Man has ever felt. Now, it's only temporary, but when he comes back, he's met by essentially the spirit of Stephen Strange. The reason being because Doctor Strange's main body was turned into a vampire, and then he kind of lost his body, and so now he's in a spiritual form, and there's a whole great big huge thing behind it. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is Stephen Strange literally says, hey man, I know this sucks, but like, you got to do it 7 more times. Because if you don't, the Earth will be destroyed. Now, again, we don't know what Doctor Doom's main motivation is behind putting all the various superheroes through these kind of tasks and so on and so forth. We have no clue what the end goal is. We'll find out in the One World Under Doom storyline, but until it comes out next year in 2025, we're just kind of playing guessing games. So, with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. We've got 7 more issues, I believe, until this story arc wraps up. So, of course, we'll cover them. Next one comes out next month, and I will catch you all later. Peace.